Hey there, and welcome to That News You Care About, a weekly video game news show from the folks over at That Nerdy Site. Today is Monday, April 12th, 2021, and I'm one of your hosts, Logan Wilkinson. Joining me this week is my Phoenix son, Trevor Starkey.
Hello.
How are you, Trev?
Doing good. Yeah. Doing good. Yeah. I'm trying to remember
This
what
is
I
our
said.
first take,
what I
guys.
said in the first time we tried this intro. It's I'm in my last couple days of work at my current job. Basically, the day this episode goes live will be my last day with the symphony. So I'm kind of looking forward to the next adventure, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. Very on topic what we were talking about before we started this podcast in terms of next adventures, but nonetheless, we are stepping back into the way back machine. This is episode 50 of News You Care About. Congratulations, we made it to 50 episodes of the show. I'm very proud of that milestone. It also seems bonkers that we are already here, but nonetheless, we are. And so me and Trevor decided to get back in time and rediscover our roots. You know what I mean? Where it all began. And we are doing a kind of retrospective on the games of our youth, right?
We're throwing the news out the window this week. This is not a news centric
forget the news.
show.
There's no news happened today of all days.
This is not that news you care about this week. This is a completely
it's the news
different...
that we care about, and
Yeah.
it's old video games this week. Trevor, tell me about your gaming youth. Tell me about your video game history.
Yeah, so this was largely like you kind of landed on this as like because you wanted to do like a special thing for episode 50, and this was the topic you landed on, and I'm curious if it largely spawned off of our recent That Nerdy Site show conversation that was the movies, the TV shows we grew up with. We're kind of talking about the games we grew up with this time. And, of course I have all of the staples of a person of my age of like the Nintendo era of, your Marios and your Legend of Zelda and all that stuff. And so I wanted to try and I'm going to dabble in, of course, to some of like the more iconic ones that I've talked about many a times, but I also like pulled out some less than iconic ones. So the first one I want to dive into is a game that I have props.
Trevor
is
has
also
props.
the thing. If you're watching the video, if you're just listening to the audio, I have props on the video version of basically like a lot of these old NES and Super Nintendo games. And so the first one I have here is Dragon Warrior 4, which is obviously the fourth entry in the Dragon Warrior series, also better known nowadays as the Dragon Quest series. We are up to Dragon Quest 11 is the one that most recently came out on many platforms, and then had like a whole Game of the Year edition kind of thing. But Dragon Warrior 4 was my intro to the Dragon Quest series. It was named Dragon Warrior out here in the West for like licensing reasons or something like that. Something else had the name Dragon Quest locked down in the States until I think Dragon Quest 8 was the first one that came out as Dragon Quest in America. But Dragon Warrior 4 was it was my introduction to that side of the RPG debate that was Final Fantasy versus Dragon Quest growing up. And I was already firmly in the Final Fantasy camp at that point. By the time I played Dragon Warrior 4, I already had a couple of the other titles that I have here ready to go of Final Fantasy 2 and 3, which were 4 and 6 here in the are 4 and 6 overall, but they were 2 and 3 here in the West.
Love this era of video games.
Exactly, right? Yeah, weird. I mean, because some of it is like, hey, the games just never got localized, so it didn't make sense to release a Final Fantasy 4 when the States didn't have 2 and 3 already. But yeah, so Dragon Warrior 4 was a game that I actually remember. I distinctly remember my friend Nick Margolis had in like fourth or fifth grade, and like. He was one of those guys I went over, played at his house, every week or something like that. He lived maybe a half mile down the road from me growing up, so like I could hop on my bike and be at his house in 10 minutes. Um,
Okay.
and like he was like I distinctly remember playing stuff like XCOM with him on his computer, and he was the first time I ever played Dungeons and Dragons. I played at his house with his older brother as like our DM. um, and like he was just a cool guy that I got along with really well, and we liked a lot of the same kinds of video games. And he had Dragon Quest or Dragon Warrior 4, and I had Final Fantasy 2. And at some point we decided to like trade games, and so like I could go home and play Dragon Warrior, and he could play my Final Fantasy 2. And then I think between our fourth and fifth grade, I think that summer he moved away, and I never got my copy of Final Fantasy 2 back. So I had to go out and
Son of a
eventually
bitch.
buy another.
Yeah.
But I still this Dragon Warrior 4 is his copy of Dragon Warrior 4 from all those years ago. But it is such a it is a lovely, charming game in the Dragon Warrior like franchise. I would later go on and play a lot of the first three games when they came to like Game Boy Color, and then I've continued to kind of dabble with the series throughout the many years since. And Dragon Warrior 4 is like still the one that stands out to me the most, in particular because it's told like through a chapter structure where like the first chapter you are playing as Ragnar the Knight, I believe. And
Yeah.
you're on a pretty straightforward quest to go save somebody from a castle. And like you go through that chapter, and then like you switch up to a completely different set of characters, and you're Athena, this like warrior monk princess, as well as like her cleric buddy, who's your basically your white mage type, and then like this old wizard kind of guy. So basically, like she's your muscle, and then they're your kind of your magic users, and they go on an adventure that ends with like her joining and fighting in like a Coliseum tournament kind of thing. And then chapter 3, I think, is what really is the one that stands out to me, and I think it was chapter 3, but it's this chapter where you play as Tulun the Shopkeep, and
Absolutely.
and you
Here
are
for it.
basically like you're the guy that works at the weapon shop in all these towns. Like that is you, that is what you do, and you go to work, and people come in and they buy equipment from you, and they will sell equipment to you, and you basically buy it back, and so like and then you put it on the store, and so somebody like and then you can buy that equipment yourself, kind of thing. It was like, as somebody who'd like loved the Final Fantasy games already at this point, it was like it blew my mind to see it like from this perspective, because you
Yeah.
can do that for like I mean in game you do it for like a couple days or something before you go out and have your own adventure, and basically you're on a quest to go get this powerful safe or something like that that will let you you basically want to be the world's best merchant is what Tulun wants. And I just remember thinking that was such a cool thing of like turning the mundane NPC character from these other types of RPGs into like a real like character, and you go out there and your special abilities are to appraise stuff and to find things in the world that like other people might pass up, but you see them as treasures because you can then in turn sell them and stuff. And so it's just a really cool like character. And then like the game goes through like 2 more chapters, I think. Or no, it goes through another chapter, and then like chapter 5 is like the hero of time basically, and it's the main character of your party that then everybody starts coming together and for the end game of the game. And so it's just a really cool way of like telling that RPG story of it. I mean, like think of it nowadays as like a Game of Thrones kind of thing, where like, oh, you see things from different characters' perspectives before you start seeing those characters interact and cross over and stuff. And I just remember thinking that was such a cool approach to a game, and it kind of like hooked me on a lot of the ideas and the design and the mentality of the Dragon Quest series that I've continued coming back to since. So yeah, it's one of those like I revisited it I don't know, maybe 5-10 years ago, because I want to say it got like some kind of like DS remaster or something like that, or I might be thinking of I might be confusing it with some other games, but it's definitely one that like I look back fondly as like my introduction to that side of the like 2 of the most iconic JRPGs kind of series that we've had over our years. So that's one I wanted to give some love to. Dragon Warrior 4.
I respect that, and I love that pick. That's a great shout out. Especially the part where you stole that kid's game. And he stole yours, to be fair, too.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it's all
So
copacetic.
we traded. I'm sure I have
Yeah.
a ton of his Pogs somewhere too, because this was the era of Pogs, and he has
Shout
a
out to
bunch of mine
Pogs.
stuff. It was like I remember.
Trevor started in the future Natterday podcast of games of our youth as well that are just board games and actual knickknacks.
Yeah.
That's a great pick. I'm going to shout out with my first pick. Where to begin? I'm going to go with Star Wars Episode 1 Pod
Racer.
Yeah. Which actually, I've actually probably played the most recently of any game on either of our lists, probably, because I played it like a year ago.
Yeah, it just got re-released, right?
And it's like, it holds up shockingly well, first off, which is always like a great feeling. I mean, for years people have talked about
the best thing that came out of episode 1, really.
Episode 1.
Like that, it's that and Darth Maul basically. I guess that Darth Maul and double-bladed lightsabers,
which is still really just Darth Maul.
Yeah,
if it's double lightsaber, you know what I mean? So, I mean, pod racing was objectively awesome and dope in the movie, and I've always liked the pod racing because I think it is, along with I'll do joint selections here because to me they're very similar, which is Jack X Combat Racing. These are my two favorite racing games. Jack X I usually say first because people actually know that one, if they know either of them. But they're an arcadey racer, cartoonish. I think both are more enjoyable to play than like
Mario Kart
or like Donkey Kong Racing or Crash Racing, like any other kind of kart racer kind of game. I think Jack X plays so cool and actually has like a story to it that is like neat enough. And I think pod racing is just it's pod racing. It's just fun, right? Like these are just fun games, and I think they get that visceral feel, just like just trying to go and beat your times and beat the people you're going against and playing with your friends online, right? Like everyone I feel like had these memories of being a kid and playing Mario Kart or playing like Crash Racing. And as someone whose friend group at large has never really been Nintendo focused, right? Never been Nintendo centric. Part of that being the fact that I'm one of the biggest like gamers, quote unquote, in the group, meant that I don't really have childhood memories of playing Mario Kart like at all, really, truthfully. But I do have a lot of like us playing PS2 kart racers, like even like like the Shrek racing game they made for the PS2, or like my younger cousins had that game, and so we would play that game all of the time, right? Like I've spent more time playing a Shrek racing game than I have truthfully probably any single Mario Kart game. Because that's the other thing, like I don't know if I've ever owned a Mario Kart game in my entire life. Because I don't remember owning Mario Kart when we had the N64. Like I don't know if that was one of the games we had. A and B, the 64 kart racing game is not good. It is like it is terrible.
I mean, like they're all good for the eras they came out.
The SNES one is good, and then the N64 one, like it's just like N64 games are so hit and miss because of like that shift to 3D. Like some I think in the moment and since were good, and some maybe were always just kind of dicey, right? But yeah, I mean, Pod Racing and Jack X Combat Racing I think are two series that nailed that arcadey, fun, just kind of goofy feel to it that defines this era of games for me, right? Like the early PS1 to PS2 kind of time period as like the 90s came to a close and the 2000s began, was these kind of games, and these kind of like mascots and images. And so yeah, whenever I think back, right, I just think on like these very colorful things in these games, and it was like the definitive kart or just racing games in general, truthfully, of that era for me. So those are gonna be my first picks. We're gonna get some racing. We're gonna get our sports game picks in here.
There you go. I mean, like if you want to, so it's interesting. It's very fascinating because like, I mean, like we talked about this a little bit before we started recording, but like growing up, games for me, like yes, I mean, I was in high school when N64 was out, and like the PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2 era. And so like I mean, like Episode 1 Racer was absolutely in rotation for me, and as well as like any number of other N64 games. Like the Mario Kart ones for me always, in addition to like having a very core group of friends that like I grew up with in from elementary school up until like early high school, and like we would play together and stuff. And so like Mario Kart was one of those things we would play. But like for me, it was even more so. Mario Kart was the kind of thing I would play at home with my dad or with my sister or something like that. And so that's why I think I had so many fun memories of those. But yeah, I mean, growing up for me, really, I do kind of like think more of the NES, SNES kind of era, and we had I was a very fortunate kid in that we had a Genesis as well, but
Hell yeah,
I was never much on the Genesis side of things. I played like Mario Kart or not Mario Kart, Mortal Kombat.
Oh yeah, all right.
Mortal Kombat on my Game Gear and the Sonic games, and those are like and like I think so. I think I have this, and I think I mentioned it before we started recording. I mentioned that like one of the things I used to do at Trevor Trove was I had kind of a recurring, irregularly scheduled segment that I called my favorite games list, and it was me going through console by console and kind of like picking some of my favorite games. And I'm pretty sure on the Genesis I had a game that was basically like NBA Lakers versus Bulls 92 or something like that. Like it wasn't an NBA Jam, but it was it was a very classic kind of sports game. And it was like the Celtics versus Lakers or something like that. I want to say actually, sure, yeah. And like I played that a ton because especially that was like the era I was into basketball. But like I have a ton of those kinds of things. But back on kind of your Episode 1, like I loved playing Episode 1 Racer. I never got into like the Crash or the Jack racing games, but you mentioning Diddy Kong Racing, I think is another staple that like I mean I will absolutely argue that Diddy Kong Racing is better than Mario Kart 64, sure. Because there's a like there it's weird because you don't get like a story much in racers like that, but there was a story, and like you were like there was a campaign mode in Diddy Kong Racing that and that's another one I played more recently than certainly a lot of other things back from that era. But I want to go back to another gem of the past. I got this one pulled up here, and it's one that you could certainly pick up and play more recently. Probably got to do it sooner than later because I think it's one of them PS3 or kinds of games that is probably going to go by the wayside soon. But DuckTales, and I have the original NES one. DuckTales. Because not only like is it a great platformer and stuff, and the modern Disney series is a phenomenal like reinvention of DuckTales, but like this is one of those that just like, oh my God, chiptune music can be so good. In particular, the Moon theme from DuckTales is one of those that is just like I love just sometimes like going onto YouTube and like typing in DuckTales Moon theme and not only playing like the original like chiptuney version, but like people have done incredible orchestrations of a lot of these music things. And it came full circle in that like they incorporated that song into the new series as basically like a lullaby that the Huey, Dewey, and Louie, like their mom basically sings to them, and she, spoilers for that show, is like trapped on the moon. And so it's like they did a cool thing of like incorporating like this very iconic music from that. But I think like one of the things that's really cool about that game is that it had like such a unique kind of control thing. Especially in an era where you're dominated by Mario jumping around and just jumping on things fine. The fact that you're Scrooge McDuck and you're basically like bouncing around on his cane like a pogo stick, and that's how you attack enemies and that's how you get around, it was an interesting like you had to kind of like break your brain a little bit to think about that. But it's one that I saw kind of on my shelf, was like, that's another gem from growing up that I want to pull out. Alongside, I left it over there, but like a couple others that are just like in that same vein of this era are the other things that are basically in the I want to say they called it like the Disney Saturday Afternoon collection. So you have like
I was just thinking.
Chippendale Rescue Rangers was
Yeah.
another one that I absolutely have the original NES cartridge of, and then this in the same vein but a little more removed. There's a Super Nintendo game that was basically like Mickey's Magical Castle or something like that, which was just another like great platformer for what it was. And I probably wouldn't have gotten through nearly as much as any of these games without the Game Genie. But we had the Game Genie, and it helped. So yeah, those are some.
I mean, even stuff like the Lion King game, like that whole like early '90s like Disney era of games, right? Like I think is such a like distinct era in time in the game industry. I just say nothing. In fact, I mean, they're all brutally like some of these are brutally hard, like infamously so. But like, like that's one where we have crossover, right? Like playing them obviously like a little bit after they came out, but yeah, I mean that kind of period in time in games, right? Like Lion King is one I have the most memories of. I think Aladdin had one as well.
Yeah.
Like all of those
and
games,
both of those have like their own like 2-for collection. I think it's out on Switch now or something like that.
Oh, so there you go.
Yeah.
Future Let's Play ideas, but yeah, like I think that's a great shout out. One that I'm gonna use to grab onto that to take us forward now to probably what will be the latest game on the list, the most recent of these games, is to me kind of that transition point from like my youth to like being more of a like high school aged kind of kid now, which is gonna be just. This is a cheat too, like it's because it's the series, because it's all kind of tied up in my head as like one, which is Guitar Hero.
Okay.
Right. And for me, because the first Guitar Hero would have come out in 2007, if I remember correctly, and so I would have been 13 again, so that's like right before I would go into high school. And so, '07 I would have been 15, I guess. So like again, like I'm in high school then, but to me, Guitar Hero is the family game, right? Like that was. I'll never forget my parents, my dad in particular, for Christmas got to like his most creative like best, where he made a giant scavenger hunt within our house of like clues to keep like going back and forth to find out like what the last present for Christmas was, and we had no idea what it was. And they were like, one was in like the washing machine, one was like behind the TV, one was like in this like side closet, like we went all over the house, like, and we had a 2-story home, and it ended up being like the final thing was the fact that it was like the full-fledged like, and this would have had to been like Guitar Hero 2 or 3 even, where we had like the guitar and the drum set and like the mic and everything was all there, and
the post rock band Guitar Hero.
Yeah, and so that whole like hunt and search and everything, because we'd already had Guitar Hero 1, we all had loved it. And so to get like the whole like family could all play like at the same time, now not just like two of us like competing against each other kind of thing, was like such a moment in time and such a big thing. And like my dad loved the game. Like my dad, I love who our dads seem very similar, Trevor, based on some various stories where like Trevor was talking about how his dad really loves like flight sim games, and I've talked before about how my dad really loves Civilization. But like the other exception to that is my dad would rock out to like Guitar Hero, Rock Band, like we had all of them, and he loved those games. Like, granted, in hindsight, thinking back on it now, I have no idea how my dad played them. Actually, he is colorblind. He is like completely colorblind in hindsight. So that's actually skills. I guess he would have just synced up to like where they're on the guitar, but that's very impressive, Dad. Actually, in hindsight, I never even thought about that as a dumb kid.
I mean, plus they're sharp enough colors that you probably. I mean, you can like even if you're seeing them as different shades of gray, they're distinct. They're like noticeably distinguished shades of gray, I would say.
But yeah, it's like he loved it though. Like he had the best time. Like me in the back doing like drums and stuff. Like I'll never forget my mom. Only ever she would watch a lot and like cheer us on. but I remember her only doing like one actual song herself that she like sang. She took the mic and like rocked out for her, and it was a Bon Jovi song, "Wanted Dead or Alive," and she aced it. She had 100%. She smashed it like on the mic, and then just dropped it and was done. It was like, no, I can't do anymore. I can't. I'm not that good. And like she's like in classic mom fashion, right? And she's like walked away and was like, you know. But yeah, I mean, it was such a cool moment in time, right? Because me and my siblings are such like distinct ages, right? Like I'm like just short of like 5 years younger than my brother, and then I'm like basically 3 years older than my sister, right? So like there weren't that many games and moments where like we were all doing stuff together, right? Like my sister always jokes she doesn't have any memories of my older brother until she was like 16, just because he was, by the time she could like do anything, he was already just about to go into high school, right? And then he was getting a car and doing all this other stuff. So like she doesn't have that many games that she played with him, right? And Rock Band and Guitar Hero are one of the ones that like brought all three of us together, that we would actually play and do stuff with. So for me, it was kind of this like transition from like, you know, more colorful mascot-y-esque platforming games to then shepherded me on into the end of the PS2, PS3 era. And like one of the last things like all three of us would play together was Rock Band and Guitar Hero.
It's interesting because I mean that like I'm of the era that like Guitar Hero was very much like, oh, it's the college game, it's the game you played at like dorms or house parties or something like that. But because I was like a theater nerd kid,
For sure.
like we didn't really play those kinds of things. Or like I certainly don't remember, in the rare time I was going out to a college party, like I don't remember Guitar Hero really being there. I played Guitar Hero. There was an iconic South Park episode about it where like they got really into it and they play Carry On My Wayward Son or something, and my sister had the game. Her and my now brother-in-law, back then they were still just dating, but they had it, and so like I borrowed it from them, borrowed like Guitar Hero 1 and 2 and like one of their guitars, and just kind of played through it, and was like, I mean, I had a ton of fun playing, you know, through all those songs and stuff like that. But I very much was like, okay, like this isn't the experience. I don't need this experience to be like a more communal thing. Like I probably played it at their house a couple times with them, but that was about it. And like on the harder level, like I never got to like where I was pushing all 5 buttons. Like I never got good at any of that.
Sure, yeah.
So I pretty much like always stayed at like medium or lower, and even there, like on some of the harder songs, I was just like, yeah, I'm just not going to play those all that much, because I just couldn't. Fair. Especially because I'm left-handed, and so like I would be much more comfortable playing on a left-handed guitar, but they were built for right-handed stuff. So
they eventually made lefty ones.
Oh, nice. But yeah, it was like, do I try and like learn the other way, and it was just like, no, I'll play it for, you know, this little burst of time and then move on. So, but I mean, absolutely fun, like great, especially great soundtracks. And I'm incredibly grateful that I didn't get into it in the like, hey, you can buy all these other tracks DLC era, because like I think of somebody who like Mike Toundrow over at 6-1 Indie, who has, I want to say like he imported over like all of his songs to his like PS5 or something like that, and it fills up like half the storage of his PS5, and I'm just like, that's okay, that's way too much. So you basically have room for like a couple other games or Warzone, and that's it, and that's all he's got, because he doesn't want to have to like keep re-downloading all that stuff, and it's just like it just got like, you could be in way too deep on that for me, and I'm glad I'm just not enough of a music person to have really like ever delved too deep or cared about that.
I think for me and my friend group were like the perfect age for it too, right? Because like we did play it at like things together, like at like each other's houses and friends, and we'd get like groups together. Like it was like a party game for like that friend group too, right? And like it is one of the earliest things like me getting more into music, right? Because like I didn't really get into music at like in any real way until I was well into my 20s. I would say like certainly into college and maybe even after that. Although before that I was like, I like that thing on like I like that on the radio. Who is it? I don't know. What genre is it? I don't know. I like that. And then the one exception was I love the Beatles, right? The Beatles are my favorite band. I can name their stuff. I have their albums. Otherwise, I like that.
It's also just dawning on me that like during this era, I was like, for I don't know 4 or 5 months, I was in a band as well. Like I played drums
Sure.
in like we had a few of our own like original songs, but then like we did covers and stuff like that. I'm just realizing like,
Yeah.
oh, that's right. Like I was playing drum set around this time. Like I had a kit that I'd had since high school and stuff, and like and that was another thing. Like the 1 or 2 times I played like Rock Band or one of the later Guitar Heroes that had drums,
Yeah.
I just didn't really like how the drums felt. Like as somebody who'd grown up playing drums, so I was
Playing
just
drums?
like, yeah, I don't really want like, I don't want to gamify that experience, I guess.
Yeah.
It
Trevor, what is your next?
also made me realize just how bad of an actual set drummer I was. But yeah. So another one I have here.
Yeah.
I'll move on to the Super Nintendo era.
Here we go.
So a few years ago, when a little game called Stardew Valley came out, I got the most hipster I think I've ever felt or been online, because all these people are suddenly absolutely in love with the farming game genre, and I've been there since the original Harvest Moon here on Super Nintendo. There's another one. This is not a friend's copy, but my friend Luke Ortega, whose like dad is now the mayor of Scottsdale.
Oh, shout out,
So like
Mr. Ortega.
I grew up like at Mayor Ortega's house, basically playing video games with his son Luke and our kind of like group of friends. And Luke had Harvest Moon, and I remember like playing it one day. It's a completely single player game, so we must have just been like taking turns playing games or something like that. But I remember playing it and just immediately falling in love with it. And so eventually, like we found and were able to get me my own copy. And yeah, I've been like a fan of the Harvest Moon series kind of ever since, going all the way back to that original Super Nintendo era. Personally, like the Back to Nature on the original PlayStation is like my favorite of the era, and I think also probably constitutes from me growing up kind of thing. But like, yeah, it's just so much fun in this weird game where you're just kind of like building up your farm, trying to you're I mean, it is very much Stardew Valley, and Stardew Valley was very clearly like inspired by Harvest Moon. But like you basically inherit the farm from your grandfather that you had like visited when you were growing up and stuff like that, and you like there's a whole bunch of people in town that you can meet and like get to know, and a whole bunch of different girls that you can like romance, and basically like if you give them gifts, their little heart meters will go up, and when you get them high enough or to the right color, you can give them a blue feather and propose and marry them and stuff like that. It's just a fun little charming thing, and it's just like a nice little like slice of life kind of thing. And I always would play it and just be like, I'm gonna try and make as much money as I can, and I'm gonna make friends with everybody in town, and just have a great little time with that game. And it's one that like I spent so many hours on my PlayStation Vita with the PS1 classic of Harvest Moon Back to Nature, just kind of like revisiting that game, because it's such a delight. I mean, I played last year. One of my most played games was Friends of Mineral Town, which was a Harvest. It's on the Game Boy Color. It was Harvest Moon Friends of Mineral Town, but as I think I've touched on. I mean, certainly with you, but I don't remember if I touched on it in. I think it was probably in our most anticipated for the year episode. I touched on the idea that Harvest Moon, now at its core, is the Story of Seasons franchise that continues on with the most recent like Pioneer Town game, and the company that actually owns the name Harvest Moon just makes terrible games now, but they're cashing in on the name recognition as best they can. So when I played Friends of Mineral Town last year, it was Story of Seasons Friends of Mineral Town, and I had a great time just kind of like revisiting that little nostalgic trip of going back to again my childhood. And it's a fun thing I do kind of every couple years. The most I like at this point they're all lacking in stuff because Stardew Valley has just put so much into it, and there's just so much like to enjoy in Stardew Valley. And this is like I'm talking 2 years removed or 3 years removed from like when I played it, and he's continued putting more and more stuff into that game. So like I'm sure it would be a completely different experience if I hopped in now, fresh in Stardew Valley. But like I when I played Friends of Mineral Town last year, I was definitely like, oh, I wish this felt more like Stardew Valley now. Like there's a funness to like knowing those characters a little bit more in the old Harvest Moon games, but like there's just a lot more fun gameplay variety that exists in a modern interpretation of that game as opposed to a lot of these other games that are still like beholden very much to kind of the old ideas and the old mechanics and stuff like that. But Harvest Moon, I've been there. I'm one of the OG Harvest Moon fans, so that is the most hipster I will ever get is being like, where were you all at? Let me pull out my handlebar mustache and throw on some horn rim glasses or something like that.
I think that's a great pick. I'm gonna go in the complete opposite direction from a pleasant little Harvest Moon Stardew Valley-esque game. I'm gonna go to Area 51. In fact, on the PS2, which for years was the scariest game I'd ever played. And Area 51 really to me is the story of movie stores and renting video games for a weekend, or if you were lucky, maybe the movie store did them for 1 week rentals, right? And because another one, the movie stores I was around to, some offered 1, 3, and 5 day rentals, and some offered 1, 3, and 7 day rentals for the games, and movies, and so me and Brandon and the other guys in the group would all we'd roll up and we'd rent a game for the weekend, and that's what we would do. That was going to be our activity for the weekend, basically, like playing this game. And in particular, like come like 5:30 at night, when it starts to get a little bit darker outside in like the fall and winter, that's when it's like, all right, it's game time, and we're just going to do this until we fall asleep, basically. And Area 51 was that game. We did play it, of course, at night, and it's terrifying, right? Like, it's a game set at Area 51. You got aliens, you got creepy shit all around, creepy crawlers. It's mainly just dark. We're pitch black outside, pitch black in the house, how you'd like to play a scary game. And I'll never forget, we first played it, and I mean, just truly traumatized the shit out of us, basically. Me and Brandon at his house on like the second floor of his home, and doing that and just constantly getting freaked out and scared, and then eventually like passing out and like falling asleep. And I don't even know how far we got, but we rented it like one other time and didn't get that much further. And then years passed. Like now we're like well into high school, well into high school, probably like senior year of high school, maybe freshman year of college. I'm trying to pinpoint it. And we rented it again and like made like a real push through the game and got past where we'd gotten before, got like really deep into the game, didn't beat it again, but I'll never forget like the next morning waking up and like trying to still just get further and further and further to see if we could finish out this game. And it to me is just like such a good symbol of like what that experience was, right? Like whether it was like going through the movie store and basically seeing all the games that are rent. We've already rented a ton of them. And just being like, I guess we'll get this game, and that game being Cold Winter, which ended up becoming one of our favorite games we'd ever played. And it's such a like dope multiplayer mode, a like crazy good, like dark story and everything, and like, but never given it a chance because the box art is truly terrible. Right, and so we had to wait until like we'd played everything else basically to check that out, right? And like like the Godfather games. Like renting those because like, oh, the Godfather's great, and then playing the games and it's like, yeah, this is all right, like, yeah, it's good, right? And Enter the Matrix, which is its own special thing. I could do a whole podcast about Enter the Matrix. And so like just those movie store rentals that you do, like, because that to me, when I think back on my like gaming youth, right, and I always have these doubts, like I didn't have a normal like gaming childhood. Like I did, like mine is so different than I feel like so many people's. Like I didn't grow up with like Nintendo games. I feel like people have memories from they were like 2 and 3 playing games, and I don't have those memories, right? Like I was older than that when I have like strong memories aside from like Crash and like Mario 64 and Sonic, where they're like, yeah, that could have been like 3 or 4, but otherwise there's like a 2-year gap beyond that afterwards.
I mean, yeah, like I'm in the same boat where I'm like, I like, obviously Mario came out the year I was born. I wasn't playing
Yeah.
it that year, like
Yeah.
but I don't like. It's all so much a blur. Like I remember it's one of those early
Sure.
gaming experiences, but I don't know if I was playing it in like 89, 90. Like, I mean, I'm sure like, given like my knowledge of my family, I was probably playing a lot of these games much later because we were getting them from
Yeah.
like the swap meet that my dad worked at on the
Yeah.
weekends and stuff. So we were
Yes.
getting them like second, third, fourth hand, like long after
Yeah.
they come out. It was a treat when we would go to
Garage
the Toys
sales,
R
man.
Us
Yeah,
and like
absolutely.
actually get like the sleeve out of the thing and buy the game new or something like that. Yeah, we were very much like buying these games much later. Like my original PlayStation was something that came, like my dad brought it home in a plastic bag, like from a grocery store,
Yeah.
like no box,
Yeah.
no, like it was like completely loose cable, like a couple spare memory cards or something like that, and like 5 or 7 games or something, like so, like all just like he just brought home a bundle of like, hey, here's a PlayStation, enjoy. And then it was like, okay, let me figure out how to get the games I actually want to play instead of Carmageddon or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And some of those early memories. I love this because you and I have touched on this before, but like when you talk about Area 51, you're talking about like the PS2 era game or something like that.
PS2.
2005.
Yeah. Early PS2.
And when I think of Area,
was it 2005?
that's what that's what
okay.
Google says. And when I think of Area 51,
okay.
I'm thinking of the light shooter game that came out to arcades a decade earlier, 1995, because that's what I think of. Because I like, I mean, I like part of this is just even a question for you, like. By the time you were growing up, were arcades still a thing, or had we already kind of
Absolutely,
moved to the
yeah,
era
no.
of like, oh, online gaming is a thing now? So, because like
But-
I know arcades are
No.
still exist and stuff, but like they are nowhere near. I feel like they're nowhere near as popular as they were in like my growing up days.
I feel like it's just a thing of like I feel like I'm the like a pivot, like someone like Roger Picorni, right? Like then that's like I think a good question. But I always talk about how like I feel like my generation, and we're in the same, we're each millennials, but like obviously you're kind of at the beginning, I'm kind of at like the middle part, and then there's like another chunk after me that is in the same group. And I feel like my age group, like 31 to like 27 kind of time period, is like the last one who I feel like got to really grow up most of their childhood without like online stuff, right? And like without cell phones, right? For most of our childhood, right? And so like, yeah, like for me, it wasn't as much like going to like an actual like arcade building itself. More so like they were at other things, right? Like for like movie theaters obviously had like ours, and back in Missouri had huge, like a whole massive arcade section, and that's where we'd spend a lot of time going to like arcade, or we'd go to not like, I can't remember what like a kid's version, not like a Dave and Buster's, but like a kid's version of like a Dave and Buster's that had like arcade games everywhere, but also had like other stuff as well, right? And like that, we would go there and play like Incredible Pizza was something in Missouri that we would have that had like, shit like that, right? And
Yeah.
like and had like mini golf there as well and everything. And like it was like an event to go to an arcade thing. It wasn't like we're gonna go to the local arcade with like $5 in our pocket and go do it. It was more like we're gonna go to the movies, see a movie, and also spend an hour either before or after playing the arcades as well and playing air hockey and doing a lot of this stuff. At least for me, in my experience.
I mean, you remember when you came out here, we went to Golfland Sunsplash, right?
yes, yeah.
And so like
100%. It was stuff like that.
It was
yes.
Golfland there. I mean, like Golfland Sunsplash is like the peak kind of one of those things. I mean, and then seeing pretty much the exact same kind of thing when I watched Karate Kid earlier this year, like where they go to that. But yeah, like that was like the pinnacle of the arcade. I mean, the one that I went to way more frequently was it was called Outer Limits at first, and then it eventually got bought and became a Fiddlesticks. But it was basically like large arcade section, like mini golf, go-karts, laser tag, batting cages,
laser
like
tag.
all like an all-in-one kind of like, hey, here's a whole bunch of things that like kids can come and do. And it was like also one of the like, it was probably that and like the movie theater were the places that any of my friends who had jobs in high school worked.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think of those kinds of things, and
I think
mean like that's where I played like stuff like like Top Skater and stuff like that, where
Yeah.
which I feel like just aren't like like when I go to a Dave and Buster's now, I look around, I'm like, so many of these things look like they just exist to like give you tickets now.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
there's like it feels like there's very few in the way of like the games that like I feel like I was growing up with, or it's all like light games or something like light gun
It's
games.
interesting because I had never been to a Dave and Buster's in my entire life until last year for my birthday, which luckily happened right before the pandemic. But last year for my birthday, Shravia actually took me to a Dave and Buster's for the very first time, and so I got to like see what all this was, and I mean, yeah, like, I mean, that is the most recent arcade I've been to in years, right? And it is a lot of like this exists to give you tickets. This exists to be like some like dumb gimmick again, like dumb gimmicky thing. Like again, how hard can you punch? How hard can you swing a bat, right? And do that stuff. They have like some cool like 3D experience like roller coaster like ride thingies. But like actual like arcade games are gone, right? And like for me, a big part of like going to the arcades were like the racing games. I've always loved it, especially if they had like you're on the bike doing like the bike
Yeah.
gimmicky shit. Loved those, right?
I would
again,
I mean I would just sit on those and not actually play the game. I would just like let the
nah.
demo
Oh,
be
yeah,
playing and just and ride on the
absolutely.
motorcycles. Yeah.
Okay, that's what you mean. Yeah, absolutely, right. Or get in like the steering wheel ones and just like in the booth and like just go crazy, right?
Yep.
Or it'd be you and your friend grabbing the two guns for like a Tekken kind of style game, right? And just like going off on that. Or like for us at our movie theater, it was we had a Terminator 2
Yep.
like on rail shooter
Yep.
game that we would play a lot.
And that's
And
like
then we
so
had
Terminator 2 is exactly what the Area 51 that I think of is. It's one of those kinds of
Okay.
games where it's
Yeah.
you're playing through like a very extended FMV and like monsters pop up and you shoot them and stuff throughout.
Yeah.
And so going back to that, like I mean, like the place you find these kinds of arcade games now seems to only be like barcades. Like there's Cobra
yeah.
Arcade here in Phoenix, which is probably one of our biggest ones, and I'm pretty sure it's like a chain. And there's a whole bunch of them. But then like there were, I mean, like I remember Kind of Funny Prom and stuff. Like a couple of the like days we just kind of ended
Yeah.
up like always making our way back to the bar arcades out there and play like because that's where you're finding like the Marvel versus Capcom games or your Street Fighters, your Mortal Kombats. Nowadays, like your Killer Queen Black is like probably the last great arcade game. But like like because when I think really of like growing up, like the time spent at the arcades is an iconic kind of memory of those. Like I shared when they announced a new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2D brawler recently. I shared out a picture of me, my friend Luke, my friend Brian, like all of us around the arcade cabinet of that original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game, or maybe it was Turtles 2 or something like that. But like I remember like we would go there and we would play those kinds of games for hours, or we would play The Simpsons or something like that. And it would just be kind of like we'd go there and like all of our families would hang out and like we'd have pizza or something, and they would go and like visit, and we would just go in the arcade and play for like basically they'd be like, okay, here's like $5 worth of quarters or something, go have fun, but that's it, that's all you're getting. And so like it became like this economy of like, okay, what games am I going to get like the most bang for my buck on these kinds of experiences. So yeah, like that, even that is like an element of like the games I remember growing up. And so it's very it's amusing that we have very different memories when we think of Area 51, but still the same kinds of emotions are arisen.
I think for me too, I also want to give a shout out to Simpsons Hit and Run on the PS2 in terms of like, again, car games. But yeah, I think even as a kid, we were always like, these are different kinds of games, right? Like we very much viewed them differently than we would view like the PS1 and PS2 games we'd go back home and play, right? Like we very much, even as a kid, we were like, yeah, this feels like this is a thing to get your money. Like I think we were like very adult in this fact of like, this is something that is to take our money, and it is also enjoyable. And a different way than like this is a video game that we're like playing for 3 days. It's still 10 times as much as the arcade machine, but like it's a different experience, right? And so yeah, we definitely have less memories of, I think, arcade games, but like, and for us too, the arcade games are part of the larger arcade experience, right? So like I can regale you with like air hockey stories too from like arcades, right? And like epic matches there and stuff like that. And like their kart racing games. But yeah, the arcade, that's a good shout out. That's a good shout out, Trevor. The last one that I'm gonna give a shout out to, that I'll do is, oh God, where do I want to go? I'm gonna do, because I think it's just such a good PS2 pick, is I'm gonna do Nightfire.
And I was gonna like say the joke answer of like, you're gonna talk about GoldenEye Nightfire, aren't you?
Yeah, but
of course you are, because you take every opportunity you can to talk about Nightfire.
But in a very real way, because like just like those kind of games, right? Like, because a big thing for me was less like 4-person like co-op games, more 2-person ones. What could me and Brandon play together, right? Or what could like me and my youngest cousins play together, right? And so it would be, like we I'll never forget one in particular where Brandon, his parents bought what I can only describe as the largest bag of Cheeto Puffs I've ever seen in my entire life. Like it was genuinely the size of a small child, and the two of us combined just ate the entire bag in one evening as he played games, right? And I just remember like
those poor controllers.
I just remember like waking up the next morning and just like filthy and like covered in shit and like on the floor, like classic game shit, like a classic, like I feel like sleepover shit like that. And then just like very groggily waking back up and being like, all right, yeah, and then just like going back to playing the video game again. Like his parents like open the door and be like, oh, we made breakfast, and like go clean yourself off first though. And like those are things like we could play Nightfire for hours on end, right? Or like Agent Under Fire, which is one before that. Like again, Agent Under Fire, no gravity, sky hooks, on like ×5 speed, and you would just be like flying around like the maps, and like latching on the wall like you were like fucking Spider-Man and just like shooting around everywhere. Were like such like distinct hours long memories where me and Brandon would just get into these like crazy marathon matches, right? Or again, I can't remember if I've talked about it on a podcast before, just like to you and other people, right? Like I've talked before about the fact that I love Medal of Honor. I do. That was like my big like first person shooter series growing up was Medal of Honor. And in particular, Medal of Honor Rising Sun is legitimately one of the video games I've played the most in my entire life. Like top 5, I would have to say probably, because that was one of the games, and every game should do this if it has like a co-op multiplayer feature where you could like add in like CPU opponents as well. And that was one where you could add in, I think it was like 6 other CPUs. So you could do like 8-person matches basically, or something crazy, like, or like 4 more, like you do 6 or something big like that. And we would do that, and we would either do me and Brandon versus like 4 basically, and because we're people, and we would make them hard, but like they had their own skill sets or whatever, and we would just see like if we could win. Or we would do just a straight up like free for all match of like all 6 of us, whatever, together, CPU, me and Brandon against each other, and like just regular deathmatch. But Rising Sun was one where you could set, the limits of like how long the match lasts or how many kills you need to win, and we would do hour-long matches of that and just go for an hour, like who gets the most kills an hour, go, right? Or we would do hour-long matches. Every person has like 50 or 100 deaths, so whichever happens first, go, right? And it's pretty neck and neck on that because it's so many lives you have, and these maps were big for the time. And so we would just play these hour-long matches for like an entire night, and then again and again and again, right? So I've played like 100+ hours easily of Rising Sun, just the multiplayer side of it, and that is what I think of when I think of like early childhood grown-up games, right? Like this podcast has already spawned another podcast idea, But like it would be a thing of right of like we get inside from it being dark, we would like pop on it, we'd watch like Rush Hour, right, or like fucking Austin Powers, whatever it might be, at the end of the '90s, early 2000s, and then we'd play our game, we'd rent it from the movie store, right, we'd get a game and a movie, and we'd just play the game the rest of the night, right, and wake up, and if we'd gotten 2 movies for the price of 1 that they did sometimes, we'd watch a second movie like the next morning maybe, and then just game again. And then like go outside and then come back in, and this was just like a weekend, right? Like you just do this for a weekend. Like you wouldn't leave your friend's house, or he wouldn't leave your house for like 3 days straight, basically, just a rolling thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you just play these games, right? Like it would be Medal of Honor, it'd be a James Bond game, it would be Cold Winter, right? As we got older, and that to me are like the memories I think of most vividly are first-person shooter co-op games that we could just play together. Enter the Matrix isn't a co-op game, but just like doing that, right? Area 51 doing that as part of like a larger rolling weekend. And even as we got older, we would obviously like technically under 18 games, I guess, but would be like Call of Duty Zombies, right? Because World at War came out in 2008, so we'd have been 16 if I'm doing the math right in my head. Putting that together quickly, and so that was like the first one, and it was a huge, like that first zombie game I feel like was such a huge deal in terms of like high school, college, like capturing the zeitgeist. And like again, that was when we would get like 4 or 5 of us all together, and and those games can last like an hour and a half easy, and just play Nazi zombies all night long and into the morning for like a weekend basically. And like that sense of like first person shooters bringing the group together has like continued to this day, obviously, as we will play like Warzone, right? Like, because again, I am the one who is still the most I play lots of games kind of person, obviously, considering what we're doing right now. Whereas they are the people who play, Brandon will play Forza and he'll play Call of Duty every year. Josh will play Call of Duty, Madden, and maybe FIFA every year, right? And like the other guys play like, again, like a few other games basically sporadically, rigs like NBA 2K. But the first person shooters like always been like the connective tissue to the group as we aged up after like the PS2 era, where like a lot of them went to like Xbox, and then I stuck with PlayStation.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, like my corresponding stuff, of course, would be like GoldenEye was, the iconic one.
Yeah, classic, right? Yeah.
Playing that again at Luke's house.
Slaps only.
Like I mean, like we played all sorts of like house rules and stuff, and it's like we never went to the extreme of like creating like segmented, so like you could only see like your corner. So like screen cheating was just kind of like part of the game and stuff like that.
Oh my god, yeah, absolutely. But you would just say you weren't doing it and would do it. Yeah,
I mean, but like even that, like there's this like it's fascinating. Like as I sit here and look at like my 65-inch TV right now, to realize like we were like it would be like 5 or 6 of us crammed on or around Luke's bed on like maybe a 20-inch TV or something like that, and it would just be like we would play, and then there would be 1 or 2 people sitting out, and they would kind of get next, and basically like if you
Whoever
won or you
last,
were on the winning team or something like that, you would continue on. And that's when it's weird because like GoldenEye, like I never owned GoldenEye myself. I think I finally own it now, like as an adult when I got my when I dug my N64 out of storage. I think I picked up a copy of it, but even now I might not own it still. But that was the kind of game like I rented or would just go and play it at friends' houses and stuff like that. And so I have like a ton of, I think even stemming off from that, like memories of playing like Doom 64 with those friends, and like playing those kinds of games. The South Park first person shooter game that's terrible, but like we played that one a ton too because that was perfectly our era. But the last one I want to chime in on, of course, if you're gonna bust out Nightfire, I of course have to talk about Final Fantasy 3 /6. Which this is like an old story for you at this point, and for people who have heard me on many things, I'm sure it's probably an old story for them. But like my introduction was Final Fantasy 2 actually, which I also brought up as kind of that was my introduction to the series. So I didn't play the original Final Fantasy until years later. I don't think I played the original one until like the PSP like remaster of those games. Despite having it, because I have that one somewhere here too. Yeah, I have the original one now on NES as well. But Final Fantasy 2, like I loved, and that like got me into role playing games. And then it was like a year or two later that I would pick up and play Final Fantasy 3/6, and I've talked about this. Like that is the game for me that makes me realize like how big stories can be in games and how like rich characters can be in games and stuff like that. And a large part of that is that I probably hadn't seen Star Wars yet. So like this idea of like this small group of rebellions fighting against this evil empire, that was a very compelling kind of story to me.
That, right? Yeah.
And the fact that like Kefka is basically the Joker, which I get, like even that I probably hadn't become like too versed in Batman and stuff at the time. So like this is introducing like all these archetypes to me that would very much kind of like be pervasive throughout the rest of my my life so far. But like just the richness of that cast of characters and the storytelling and of course this is from an era where you can name all those characters, and so I was constantly like, you could always kind of tell like where a save file was from my life based on like what the characters were named. Like the girl characters would be whoever I had a crush on at that point in time or something like that, and the guys would be like my friends or my group of friends or something like that, or family members or something. And so like I just like it is a game that obviously very near and dear to my heart. I've written like school papers on like that game and the cast of characters in that game, because that is the game that made me realize, especially like it was a turning point where I was like, I'm reading as much text and script and dialogue in this game as I would be if I was reading like a book for an English class or something like that. Like these games are interactive novels and stuff like that, and just like enjoying that element of it. Again, like the music is phenomenal across the entire series, but like that one in particular has so many of like these standout themes that I love so dearly. And so yeah, it was my favorite game for a very, very long time. So it is very much like a key element of who Trevor was growing up. And it's weird because like I definitely associate especially that Super Nintendo era with RPGs. But like if you were to like, I mean, I've talked a little bit with this about Scott White over at like Professor RPG over at Irrational Passions, but like I was so ingrained in Final Fantasy games, and then eventually like the Dragon Quest, Dragon Warrior games, that like I really didn't spend much time in other RPG worlds like Earthbound and Super Mario RPG and stuff like that, and the Paper Mario games, all of those largely because they were like offshoots of like ideas from Square and Squaresoft and Enix and stuff like that. But like there's such a wider world of RPGs out there that I really just never got into myself because I was so like, I'm locked in. I'm a Final Fantasy person. Like that's where my fanboyism is. So I never got into like the Tales games or stuff like that. And it's like, I'm sure sad because there's like a rich, breadth of those kinds of games. But like, I almost sometimes say like, don't want to say I'm like, an RPG fan. Like, I almost brought it up when we were playing Emily is Away 2, and they asked like, what kind of games are you into? And I was like, well, of these, like RPGs clearly, but really RPGs, like now more so because every game has like RPG elements and stuff. But like for me, it was very much Final Fantasy, and that was like what RPG meant to me. Like my original PlayStation 1 I talk about a lot is like, it was a Final Fantasy system for me. I had Final Fantasy 7, 8, 9, and then I had like the Anthology Collection and Chronicles and Origins, which were basically like all of the other Final Fantasy games and Chrono Trigger, and Final Fantasy Tactics, of course, and stuff like that. And there are very few other, like if I look at the remainders of my original PlayStation 1 collection, like it's those games and Harvest Moon Back to Nature and a couple other titles that I may or may not have ever played. They might have just been like games that came in that original bag that my dad brought home from the swap meet. And I was just like, I don't care about this game at all. So no, I'm not going to bother with this. But yeah, Final Fantasy 3/6, of course, very much a key to Trevor growing up with video games.
I think it's a great shout out, and shout out to dads bringing home random video game consoles and games in a bag. Trev, I think this is a great topic and conversation. Maybe we'll revisit it later on. There are lots of games from our youth that we could, I'm sure, spend countless podcasts talking about. But for now,
Yeah, we're probably only looking at like 5 or 6 years of a span of time in the games I brought up. So
yeah, same. Yeah, and so we'll stop it right there. If you like what you heard, you can go support us over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. Like all of our wonderful patrons and supporters have. Their support means the world to us. It helps keeps the lights on and makes shows like this and like that D Plus show happen. So thank you again for all your support over there. Again, that is patreon.com/thatnerdysite. You can also go support us by liking, subscribing, and sharing with your friends all across the globe, and leaving us a 5-star review and rating on iTunes. It helps get the word out and spread the good gospel of Nightfire and Final Fantasy III and Area 51, whichever version you played, to more people. Otherwise, you can go over to youtube.com/thatnerdysite. Like, subscribe, share with your friends there as well. We're trying to get to new subscriber milestones to make it happen. And
do you
otherwise,
want to know where we're at right now? I've got the
where are we at?
analytics
How
page
close are
pulled
we?
up.
How are we at?
We're 252, so we've already hit the April
Hey,
goal.
we already did it, guys. So let's go.
Gotta-
Bump it, push goal.
Got to bump it up
stretch
to
goal.
300 by the end of April.
Here we go, 300. I like the way you think. Otherwise, you can go find Trevor at Trevor J. Starkey on the internet. Anything you want to shout out, Trev?
I mean, like, in addition to go enjoy all of our content, I just want to give a shout out to, it was a big news day among our friends and circles and stuff like that on the internet. Big shout out to Andrew Renee and Brittany Brombacher of What's Good Games for announcing they're both expecting little ones in the near future.
Mazel tov.
So congratulations to them. Congratulations to Jess Cogswell, or is Howard? I don't remember which one she goes by anymore. But she announced that she is now a news contributor for GameSpot.
I didn't see this, actually.
Yeah.
I didn't see that one.
Yeah, that was one that came up today. And who else? Was there anybody else that I'm thinking? I'm sure Roger Picorni, who you mentioned earlier in the show, I believe. He was on the Kind of Funny podcast this week. So
Yes, he was.
lots of exciting times for not only our friends but just other people in the industry. There's lots of moving and shaking around there. So congratulations to everybody abound today.
I will concur and retweet all of that. You can go find me at LeftyLogie or LeftyLoggy, LOGGY on the internet. I will first and foremost give a shout out to Roger Picorni because I love that man very dearly. And it was very, very exciting to see him on the Kind of Funny podcast. Otherwise, I will give a shout out to like 5 hours of content that me and Trevor recorded over the weekend because I think it's pretty good. So go check that out. By the time this goes live, the first one of those 2 recordings, which will be our newest episode of It Takes Two playthrough, will be up.
Yep.
It is horrifying at certain aspects.
Yeah, we go on a rampage. We go on a murderous rampage
truly
through
wild.
Rose's toys.
That may or may not be a 2-parter. We might split it in half. I'm not sure, but
I kept it as all one.
Kept it as one is terrifying. And then tomorrow, the day after you listen to this, another Let's Play goes live in which me and Trevor journey through Emily's Way 2 together. I had a lot of fun with that. I really enjoyed that Let's Play. So go check all of those out over on YouTube. Otherwise, you can go find That Nerdy Site at That Nerdy Site. For myself, for Trevor, and for all of us here at That Nerdy Site. Play your games and be good to each other.